He thought he knew who he was. What are the best memories from your childhood?
Wow. There's a lot of them.
Where he came from.
I said, you were the best father any kid could ever have had.
With a loving family, the best of friends.
He was like a big brother to me.
Until a phone call.
She goes, do you know you're adopted?
An amazing story revealed for the first time.
I was the 7th child of 13.
He learned his best friend was really his brother.
I said, I can't believe this.
And an old flame was his sister.
I said, oh my God, I dated my brother.
You could have gotten married.
Absolutely.
You could have had children.
Yes.
Long buried secrets. Painful questions.
Was this a business? Could you maybe make money selling children to be adopted?
For a newfound family, an emotional voyage of discovery.
Very sad to know you have siblings. And never know they're there.
And for the families who raised them, a wrenching adjustment.
I watched you laugh. I watched you cry. But these people do not know you like I do.
A special hour about the true meaning of family.
We were all blessed to end up with the parents that raised us.
And the power of love.
Let me know you. I'm your brother.
Stone Phillips with Family Ties. From our studios in Rockefeller Center, here is Stone Phillips.
Good evening. What did you know and when did you know it? Those are questions we usually hear from investigators trying to solve a crime. But the man whose story you'll hear tonight had to ask himself those questions as he looked back on a past that had suddenly become a puzzle as he tried to come to grips with the unsettling reality that he wasn't who he thought he was. It's a story about family secrets, uncanny coincidence, and how the ties that bind can become tangled like you wouldn't believe. It all began with a phone call.
December 30th, 1998. Phone rang, and it was a lady with the state of Connecticut, and proceeds to, ask me some very personal questions as to my identity, as to, making sure that I am Gary Klar.
The state worker had her man. And when Gary Klar hung up the phone and told his children what he had just learned, his 16-year-old daughter Rachel asked him some questions he will never forget.
Who are you, Daddy? Are you Gary Klar? Who are you, Daddy? Who are we?
Until he got that phone call, Gary Klar's only identity problem was being mistaken for the governor of Minnesota. With that shaved head and larger-than-life presence, he looks, talks, and flexes just like that famous former grappler, Jesse Ventura.
Yeah.
But these days, Gary is wrestling with a more fundamental identity problem. How to find the full picture of who he is and the real story of where he comes from. For most of his life, Gary Klar's personal history seemed pretty straightforward. He grew up here on Puritan Road in suburban Fairfield, Connecticut. His parents, Ben and Marjorie Klar, waited years to have children. But eventually, they had 4. Gary was their first. And to them, he was like a gift.
What are the best memories from your childhood?
The best memories, wow, there's a lot of them. For me, anything that involved my dad and myself. Truthfully, the greatest guy I've ever known. Never met a better man.
You had a special connection with him.
The best. Absolutely the best.
Gary followed in Ben Klar's footsteps in every way he could, playing catcher, the position Ben had played in baseball, and learning about their shared Jewish faith, his father at his side at his bar mitzvah. And as Gary went on to become a 3-sport star in high school, Ben filled scrapbooks with his son's athletic triumphs, all the way to a brief stint in the NFL. One moment Gary has always treasured is captured on this game film, his arm around his dad after Gary starred in his college team's upset of mighty Ohio State in 1967. In 1979, their lifelong bond was broken by tragedy. Gary was helping his father on a construction job when a scaffolding collapsed. Ben was trapped beneath, critically injured, in a coma from which he would never emerge. Gary visited him in the hospital every day until he died.
I believed he could hear me, even though there was no response, that, he wasn't acknowledging me. I knew that. I remember the last thing I told him. I said, Dad, you worked so hard your whole life to give us all a wonderful life. You were the best father any kid could ever have had. I want you to know that. I believe my dad heard me, and he just couldn't come out of it.
After Ben's death, Gary came across a box filled with clippings for one scrapbook his father never got around to making. That labor of love fell to Gary's best friend, Steve Barbin.
I says, let me take this home and let me get through it for you. Let me just put this in some order. I says, there's so much beautiful stuff in here, things you want to remember, that your dad made an effort for. Let me do it for you.
Steve dedicated the scrapbook to Gary's father. He knew just how close they'd been. Steve's friendship helped fill the void Ben Klar's death had left in Gary's life. And for Steve, who'd never had any brothers or sisters, Gary filled a void too.
Some people you meet in life, they're good friends, best friends, but it was closer than that. And I think what happened over time was that he was like, and being an only child, he was like a big brother to me.
And even as Gary switched from a career in sports to acting, Steve continued to collect mementos, becoming almost an archivist of Gary's career. From Broadway to TV to small parts in films like Married to the Mob.
Oh, looky here, boss.
Big.
Next.
And for fans of horror movies, a memorable role in Day of the Dead.
Bang! You're dead.
But the simple plot line of Gary Klar's life suddenly became very complicated with that phone call 2 years ago. Initially, Gary was confused because the caller said she was from the Connecticut Office of Adoption Services.
My wife and I have 3 lovely, healthy children. To my knowledge, we weren't planning on adopting any kids.
You thought they were calling you to find out whether you'd be interested in adopting somebody.
Yeah, maybe my wife put an application in and decided we should adopt, fine, but I know we hadn't done that.
The state caseworker was about to drop a bomb.
She says, do you have a chair nearby? I said, yeah. She says, well, why don't you sit down? She says, I have something to tell you. And just like that, she went into the whammy. I mean, the brick between my eyes, right in the forehead. She goes, do you know you're adopted? I went, huh?
This was a bolt from the blue.
A bolt from the blue. Never had any idea. There was never any indication that I was anything other than the blood of Benjamin and Marjorie Klar.
After a lifetime of knowing exactly who he was, 51 years of certainty, Gary Klar suddenly felt certain of nothing. Did it make any sense to you?
No, not at all, Stone. I never had a premonition. I never had a dream. I had no idea growing up that I was adopted.
The caseworker explained that her phone call was part of a medical search by one of Gary's birth sisters, a woman who'd been adopted by another family.
She said, Gary, I've done over 4,000 of these in my 25 years working for this department. I've never seen a case like this. And then she proceeded to tell me basically that I was the 7th child of 13.
12 of those 13, now adults, were still alive. 8, including Gary, had been given up for adoption in southern Connecticut. The caseworker began to draw him a new family tree, uprooting everything he'd taken for granted about his life. But once she'd started, Gary didn't want her to stop.
Okay, keep going. Let the story unfold. Tell me what it is I need to know about my life, where I really came from.
He'd been raised Jewish in the suburbs. Where he really came from was a Roman Catholic couple who lived in a public housing complex and over 18 and a half years had 13 children. The caseworker told Gary that both of his parents had died years earlier, but there was some information she could share.
On one of the records, it says of your birth parents.
Right. Parents are resigned to their life's situation, which I took to mean one of deprivation. There was no money. There were problems. It was a very dysfunctional family.
The revelations were piling up in numbing succession. The parents who had raised him were not his birth parents. The blood that ran in his veins was not theirs. But if Gary felt he had lost something, he was about to get something in return.
I said to her, I have a friend. He told me he was adopted, and therefore, it can't be a bad thing. I know somebody who's adopted. He's a squared-away guy. He's my best friend. So now I'm adopted, too. We share something, and we're best friends. And she stopped me, and she said, who's your friend? And I told her, and she immediately said, do you have his phone number? I said, if you are going to tell me, and I just locked into this. This was like one of those feelings that you get. I said, if you're going to tell me that this particular gentleman who I've known as my best friend for almost half of my life is my brother, you would be giving me the greatest gift in the world.
20 miles away, Steve Barbin, the man who had painstakingly assembled that scrapbook, Gary Klar's best friend for almost 25 years, came home to a message on his answering machine. It was from a woman who said she worked for the state of Connecticut.
And I'm thinking, geez, what the heck did I do? It's the end of the year. Is there something with taxes or whatever's coming up? So I called the number, and I had a woman who was on the phone, and she asked, you know, are you sitting down?
Like Gary, Steve found himself a seat. He had always known that he'd been adopted. He had just never given much thought to his birth family. But even if he had, nothing could have prepared Steve for what the caseworker was about to tell him.
She said to me, you're one of 13 children, brothers and sisters. And I said, wow. And she said to me then, there's something else I have to tell you. And I'm thinking, my God, what the heck else can there be? She says, I have something to ask you. Is there anybody that's very, very close to you that has ever said to you, you're so much alike and close that you could be like brothers?
Steve didn't hesitate.
I said to her, are you telling me that Gary Howard Klar is my blood brother? Of all the people I knew in my life, there's not one person that I could say said to me, you know, we're close, we could be like brothers, this, that. He'd be the only one. And when I said that to her, she said, yes, he is. And I said, I can't believe this.
And before the day was over, Steve Barbin was on the phone with his best friend and big brother, Gary Klar.
And his first words are, hey, Gare, do you believe this story?
Disbelief, shock, joy? What words could capture their feelings at that moment? 25 years of friendship that began with a chance meeting in a bar had been affirmed in startling fashion.
As much as it blew me away, it's like, well, it kind of like went, it makes sense.
I can't explain it. There was something there I can't put my finger on that I really liked this guy. I saw a goodness in him. I said, this is really a good guy. He's just a great guy. I want to know this guy.
Looking back, the two men could marvel at the closeness of their relationship. 10 years earlier, Gary was best man at Steve's wedding. And for years, their wives teased them about just how close they were.
My wife, Carolyn, God bless her, used to say, you know what? You guys could have been twins and come out of the same egg. You talk alike. Your voice inflections are alike. Sometimes you'll finish sentences. You think alike.
You could have been brothers.
Could have been brothers. Absolutely.
And remember how Steve had collected all those mementos from Gary's career? Well, take a look at the inscription on this photograph in Steve's study from 1988. Years before they knew they were brothers, Gary had written, a guy could have no better friend. You are truly my brother. It was almost as if the secret had been lying in plain sight all along.
It was a great joy and a love for us to find that out. But I think there was some cosmic thing that maybe we had known this. It wasn't like best friends finding out they're brothers and while we're closer, we'd always been that close to begin with.
I said, Stephen, I loved you as my friend. I love you as my brother. Nothing's changed.
So how do you answer your daughter Rachel's question?
Yeah.
Who are you really, Daddy?
Well,
who are we really?
I say to my daughter, I say to my kids, you are who you are. You're a Klar. My mother and father are Ben and Marge Klar. That's my nurture. That's where it comes from. The other part is my biology, which is very important. It's important for me to know. But it's not really, particularly my children. It's not really them. My kids are me. And I'm Gary Klar. I'm glad they are. It's a very complicated question.
As you're about to see, that is one colossal understatement, because that caseworker from Connecticut wasn't finished with Gary just yet.
Just when you thought it couldn't get any weirder.
Just when I thought it couldn't get any weirder.
Ties continues.
Brother Richard.
I'll get it out of you. Don't worry, one.
At age 51, Gary Klar had learned for the first time that he'd been adopted. That was unsettling enough. But when he heard the name of the sister whose medical search had unlocked his secret past, he was floored.
Well, the first thing I said to the caseworker was, do you realize that there is an issue here?
Micah Ellison is the sister who had started it all. She knew from an early age that she had been adopted from a large family, but beyond that, she didn't know much about her biological roots. Micah had always been curious, but says her mother cautioned her about delving too deeply into the past.
She often said to me, Micah, I wouldn't go down that road if I were you. And I would say, Mom, but why? She said, well, maybe you won't want to know certain things. You might not like what you find. And that was her biggest fear, that maybe if I did go there, I might not like what I found.
In fact, it was only when Micah was in her 30s that she discovered that Richard, her adopted younger brother, was actually her blood brother. But she never probed further. Then, 2 years ago, in December 1998, all that changed. Richard had a cancer scare, and suddenly finding out more about their biological family, learning details of their birth parents' medical history, became a necessity.
And I said, look, Rich, I'll do something. I'll call the state, and I'll find out from our records what our biological parents died of, or if they're still alive.
Though Richard's medical crisis would pass, Micah contacted the state of Connecticut, and soon a caseworker called. The same caseworker who would eventually call Gary Klar and Steve Barbin. She didn't have much medical information to share, but told Micah her family history was fascinating.
And I said, well, why is it so fascinating? And she said, because you are one of many children.
The caseworker told Micah that her birth parents had died, but gave her a list of her biological brothers and sisters. At that point, first names only to protect their privacy. With that new information, Micah set out to do some amateur detective work, starting with one name on that list, Gary.
So I started going through the phone book, and I came across some Garys, and I said, maybe this is my brother.
Just Gary's?
Just Gary. Yes, Gary who lives on this street, Gary who lives on that street. I mean, really, what a silly thing to do.
Not surprisingly, she came up empty-handed. But within days, the caseworker put Micah in touch with two other brothers on the list. They had been raised by the birth parents and were eager to meet their long-lost sister.
They actually came out and greeted me with beautiful flowers. They couldn't wait. They were peeking out the door when my car drove up. And they ran up to me, each one of the brothers, and they gave me the biggest hug and the biggest kiss. It was just like almost a common bond that you felt.
Micah says the brothers told her they always knew there'd been other babies, but were never sure where they had all gone. They did, however, remember something their father once said. And when they told Micah, it took her breath away.
The way it was worded was, Pop said there were 13 of you, and then he said a baby went to a Klar family. And I went, oh. And I went in the bathroom and I closed the door, and actually I cried. I said, oh my God, I dated my brother.
The brother, of course, was Gary Klar.
What were you feeling?
I was, to say the least, I was shocked, Stone, but also I felt a little bit like, oh my God, did I do something wrong here? Was I guilty of something? I mean, this is not something I wanted to think that I would date a brother, a blood brother.
How had it happened? It began with a chance meeting in 1979 at this Connecticut hospital. Gary was there with his father, who was in a coma after that accident. Micah worked at the hospital and was also visiting a dying relative. She ran into Gary in the intensive care unit and recognized him from his high school football days.
Wow, I said, are you Gary Klar? And he said, I'm Gary Klar. And he said, I know you.
We hooked up for whatever reason. The pain of, watching a relative die, whatever. The solace that maybe one finds in somebody. I wasn't married, and we kind of fell into each other's arms, so to speak.
Years before Gary met Micah, in fact, when Micah was just beginning to go out on dates here in Fairfield, she was already aware of the possibility that she might accidentally date one of her own brothers. That might sound far-fetched, except Micah had been told that her birth parents had a number of sons and that several had been given up for adoption. So she needed to choose her boyfriends very carefully.
You had a rather unusual first date question that you would ask the guys that were interested in taking you out.
Are you adopted? That was always my first question. I would say, are you sure you're not adopted?
Because you knew there were some
some
brothers out there.
There were some brothers out there in the area, yes.
Gary Klar had to pass that little test, too. When he came calling, it was Micah's mom who popped the peculiar question.
She said, Gary, are you adopted? And he said, no, I'm not adopted. And she said, okay, she just, fine. And we continued to date.
And at that point, he had no idea.
He had no idea. And I had no idea.
And even if I had known I was adopted, I would never have known she was my sister anyway. So whatever great taboo that would be in this society we live in.
You couldn't have known.
There's no way.
Did you feel a connection with her?
Well, I think the connection I felt with her was one of empathy, of being in a hospital. I mean, was there a bond like there was between me and Stephen? No. It wasn't that deep. It wasn't that heavy.
You could have fallen in love.
Oh,
you could
sure.
have gotten married.
Absolutely.
You could have had children.
Yes. My wife's joke about that is we could have had squirrels for kids.
After dating for several months, Gary and Micka went their separate ways. Micka went on to get married, as did Gary. Now, almost 20 years later, they were about to become reacquainted in the most awkward and uncomfortable way imaginable. When you finally talked about this,
right.
When you realized what had happened.
We were incredulous. Well,
what did you
the first
say
thing I
to
said
each
to her
other?
is I called her up and I said, Micka. And she goes, hi, Gary. Because she knew it was me. She was prepared for the call. I said, Micka, are you all right? And she said, absolutely. She was. She was fine. No problem. And I said, I am too. And indeed, she was very, very excited.
He said, we didn't know, Micka. And I said, no, we didn't, Gary, but I love you and you are my brother. I said, so welcome aboard.
Micka found great joy in it. And I think, you know, rightfully so. You know, it shouldn't be looked at as dirty or sordid or negative. What year was this?
If Gary and Micka have any lingering discomfort over what was and what might have been, it's not apparent. They'll tell you they're just happy to have found each other again, this time as brother and sister.
Micka was very intense with this story. I mean, she took it like a football and she ran to pay dirt.
If she hadn't done this.
Right, nobody would know. Micka knew she was adopted. And of course, the brother she was raised with, her brother Richard, also turns out to be my full-blood brother.
As if Gary hadn't already filled his lifetime quota of adoption surprises, Richard, the brother whose health problems had set off the chain of discoveries,
has been my workout partner for 15 years. So that's another
Wait a
story.
minute. So you're working out with him?
Right.
This is your brother.
Yeah, but I didn't know he's my brother. And Richard is someone I've known probably closer to 20 years.
another coincidence, another family connection.
Which was more stunning? That your best friend is your brother?
Yeah.
Or the girl you once dated is your sister?
Well, I think the most beautiful revelation to come out of all this is that my best friend, we're so close and always have been close, is my real brother. Micka's story with me is a moment of another kind. I'm not quite sure if it's the story that I share with Stephen, because that is one of love and friendship and ultimately brotherhood. The story with Micka is one that, well, perhaps a cautionary tale about private adoptions.
So in one afternoon, Gary Klar had discovered that his best friend, a girl he once dated, and his weightlifting partner were all part of a family he never even knew existed, his own biological family.
It was an overwhelming amount of information to really process, and it's still going on, Stone. It doesn't end. The onion, there's still a few more layers of the onion that we have to peel back.
Gary Klar's journey of discovery still had a ways to go, with more people to meet and one more family secret yet to uncover.
Family Ties continues.
In the 2 years since Gary Klar found out about his adoption, he spent a lot of time prying for information, trying to make sense of his past. Sifting through this old steamer trunk with his son, Matt, he found some treasures: a Jewish prayer shawl, his father's diamond-tipped glass cutter, the tool of Ben Klar's trade.
Here's me. Look, Matt. Look at me here.
And among dozens of photographs, one familiar image he was seeing in a very different light. Gary as an infant in the arms of his great-aunt, Nita.
Gary's great aunt was a nurse at this Connecticut hospital where he was born. He's now learned that she helped facilitate his private adoption, putting the Klars in contact with the birth parents without the participation of a state agency. By the time Connecticut made private adoptions illegal in 1958, Gary's birth parents had given up 8 of their children, all through private channels.
They were resigned to their fate, having all these children. I don't know whether it was because they were Catholic and, you know, an issue with birth control. I even took it down another road. Was this a business? Could you maybe make money selling children to be adopted? I don't go in that direction. I tend to think it means they were having all these kids. They couldn't afford us.
In fact, on the issue of money, state records say that Gary's biological parents received payment only for birth-related expenses.
My parents who gave birth to me perhaps found better homes for us than they could have given us, which I think is a nice thing, not a bad thing. I had a good home.
But Gary still couldn't understand why his parents had kept his adoption a secret. Even the father he was so close to all his life had never whispered a word. How had the truth of his birth been concealed for so long? Once more, the caseworker had the answer.
My mom, who raised me, Marge, faked her pregnancy.
She faked carrying you.
Yeah, she wore padded dresses for the 9-month period that she would have carried had she really been carrying a child. So she actually would pad the dress month after month.
It was not unheard of years ago for a woman to pretend to be pregnant before coming home with an adopted baby. Adoption often carried a stigma for couples unable to have children or children given up by their birth parents. But if the secret was meant to protect Gary growing up, he was having a hard time appreciating that fact now.
When you first heard it, were you angry at your mother?
Yes, I was.
At your adopted mother?
Yeah, I was. I have seen certain things in writing that state that she was absolutely adamant that I would never, ever be told, nor should I know, where I came from.
Do you think she was trying to protect you by not telling you?
I don't know. It's a hard question to answer. I wonder if maybe she was protecting herself.
And she made sure your father,
my father,
Ben, never told
you. Ben went along with it. My belief is he did it for her, and he certainly treated me as if I was his own child.
Even though you weren't blood?
Even though, as I found out, I was not his blood.
Gary didn't have Ben to turn to for answers. Only his adoptive mother remained to make sense of his newly jumbled history. But after all the years of secrecy, what would she say about the adoption? After all those years, would she have anything to say at all? Gary waited 4 months before he finally felt ready to talk to her.
And I called her up and I said, Mom, I know the secret. She said, what secret? I said, I know the secret of my birth.
And what did she say?
Very first thing she said to me, Gary, you had a good life. And I said, yeah, basically I did. I had a real good life.
She acknowledged, yes, you were adopted.
Yep, she did.
Since we first talked to Gary last summer, his anger has given way to a clearer understanding of what his adoptive parents did and why. Remember, he was born to a Catholic couple, but adopted by a Jewish family. He says his adoptive mother, who declined to speak with Dateline, recently told him that she was afraid his Orthodox Jewish grandparents would never have accepted a non-Jewish grandchild. And that's why she went to such lengths to pretend she was pregnant.
Here's me. I remember this.
Other details of Gary's past have been hard to come by. In Connecticut, as in most states, many adoption records are sealed by law. Gary has to petition a court just to get a copy of his original birth certificate. But pieces of the puzzle are falling into place. Just as with that old photograph of him with Great Aunt Nita, there's something else that's taken on a whole new meaning. A series of anonymous phone calls he received when he was in high school.
It was an older woman, and she would ask me questions that had no logic to me. I would get questions like this. How are you? How you doing? What are you doing? How's school? And who is this? The common sensible thing for me to do would have been to hang up the phone. I can tell you this right now. I can't tell you why I didn't.
You didn't have any idea who she was?
No idea.
Decades later, with his new, revised life history, Gary believes he knows exactly who it was. He believes the woman on the phone was his birth mother.
I believe she wanted to hear my voice. She may have done it with the other kids. I don't know that.
It's poignant to think
She
about.
heard my voice. I believe she wanted to hear my voice. Just what does he sound like? Here's this boy. She may have gone to a football game in high school at Ludlow Field. Maybe she sat there. I mean, what I want to believe, truthfully, is I want to believe that maybe she looked out over that field, saw me play, and said, that's my son. I'd like to believe she did that. I do believe in my heart that that woman was her, that she just wanted to hear me speak.
When we return, brothers and sisters gather, and another family member shares an emotional life story.
Of family ties.
And we're right around the corner from where I grew up.
If chance played a role in bringing Gary Klar together with three strangers who turned out to be siblings, so did geography. Their birth parents placed 8 children with adoptive families who lived within 25 miles of each other.
And Joan and me.
A few weeks ago, we brought 6 of the brothers and sisters to New York to talk about their new status as family. From youngest to oldest, there's Adrian, number 13 in the birth order, then Steve, Richard, who grew up with Micah, Gary, number 7 in the lineup, and Joan, the only one in this group no longer living in Connecticut. And the family resemblance is unmistakable.
What do you notice the most? Micah?
With the girls, the eyes, the green eyes.
And the boys?
I think the eyes first, Dalton. I think everybody kind of notices that. The color, the brilliant luminescence.
As you can see, they all got the gene for laughter. And if there's a chromosome for coincidence, too. Before any of them knew they were brothers and sisters, Gary and Steve were best friends. Micah dated Gary. Micah and Rich grew up in the same family, which almost adopted Steve, who married a girl who once dated Rich, who was Gary's workout partner.
Richie, you started all of this. I mean, if you hadn't had the medical scare, the health scare, you wouldn't all be sitting here today.
That's true.
Together.
It gave Micah an opportunity to do something I think she wanted to do most of her life, and that is to delve into our adoptive backgrounds.
How did you feel about that?
I was
Uncomfortable.
uncomfortable. It's a good word. I was resistant at first, and then was brought into the loop by this big guy right here. And when he finally stood up and says, and guess what? I'm your brother, it was no surprise.
Joan, like Gary, you didn't know you were adopted.
Not at all.
Your parents never told you.
No.
And they never told her that one of her playmates as a little girl was actually a biological sister adopted by another family. For Joan, the secret came out not in a phone call, but with a letter from the state of Connecticut.
Dear Joan, I am working on a Connecticut probate court matter which I believe may be of interest to you.
At first, she thought the parents who had raised her, who had died, might have left her some money. But as she read the letter to her aunt and saw that it came from the state adoptions office, another thought leaped out at her.
It was an awful thing to say, but I thought, did my father have an illegitimate child? Maybe he had an affair? And I thought, oh my God. And I said that to my aunt. I said, and she said, read the letter to me again. And I did. And then she started to cry. She said, Joan, you're adopted. And I said, oh my God. I said, why didn't anybody ever tell me?
She knew, your aunt
Oh,
knew.
they knew right from the beginning. I was adopted 10 days out of the hospital. And everybody in my family knew, and I was never told.
So at age 50,
Going on
52,
53, right.
you find out.
For the first time in my life that I was adopted. And never mind just being adopted, that I have 13 natural siblings. I mean, it's like...
All this baggage over here.
Yes, I thought maybe I would be a candidate for the rubber room in plain English. It took me a while to, I mean, really, there were days when I wouldn't answer the phone because I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't know how to deal with it.
When you looked in the mirror after hearing this, what did you think?
I did. I looked in the mirror that night, and I just looked in the mirror, and I started to cry, and I said, I always thought I looked like you, Mom. And I said, but now who do I look like? And my aunt said to me, she said, you look just like your birth mother. You always did.
Though it's been more than 2 years since Joan got her bolt from the blue, the emotion of it all is not far from the surface. As I finish reading her letter from the state of Connecticut,
Simple letter.
Yeah.
It changed everything for you.
Changed it all in an instant. I mean, really.
it triggered a bittersweet reaction.
Very sad to know you have siblings and never know they're there. I'm happy I have them all. I love them, and I wish I knew them. And even though I didn't have all the years, I hope that I have many more years left with them. And I know whatever happened, there was reasons, and it's okay with me. If our birth mother was here today, I would tell her that. And if my parents were here, I would say it's okay. I'm just happy. I love my siblings, and I can't wait to see them. Sometimes I wish I didn't live where I live, because I lived all around them and never knew it until I moved away.
Joan will never forget the first conversation she had with a brother. It was a phone call from Steve.
Steve, you remember that conversation?
So confusing. Not the first time.
I remember 3, Steve.
Are you totally lost now?
No, it gets so involved in so many people you're speaking with that, you know, I think in those first few months you're just in a state of confusion and shock. And then, of course, the biggest shock of everything was to find out that the guy that's been my best friend for 25 years and best man at my wedding and all these things happens to turn out to be my blood brother.
Oh,
So,
unreal.
A lot of time to make up for, to catch up on. Adrian, how do you feel?
I love every one of them. I feel like they've been in my life for a long time right now. There's still things that we don't know, you know, but they are my brothers and sisters. I wish I did have them to grow up with, too.
Do they feel like brothers and sisters?
Oh,
or do
yes.
they just feel like good friends at this
No,
point?
they feel like brothers and sisters. Yep. I get a phone call, you know, hey, from, like, my sister's, it's the little one, the baby, you know. It's like...
The rules of sibling rivalry notwithstanding, in this group, the laughs still seem to outnumber the tears.
I mean, I had a lady call me one day, and a friend of mine, and she said, "You're never going to guess what I'm going to tell you." And I just said, "Don't tell me you're my sister."
I'm curious about your adoptive siblings and their reactions to all of this. Were any of them afraid that they would lose you to your new brothers and sisters?
Yeah. I think the incident that brought it home to me, most of all, was at my daughter's high school graduation last summer.
Gary hosted this graduation party and invited some of the new siblings. But one guest you don't see here is the sister he'd grown up with, Lori. She had come to the party, but quickly disappeared.
And probably 2 hours later, I found my sister in the back, and she was in tears. And she said, I get choked up when I think of it. She said, "Gary, I know you told me, you prepared me for this, but I'm meeting people who are calling you brother, and they're not in the sense that I grew up with you. I watched you laugh. I watched you cry. I've been part." Thanks, honey.
I remember.
I've been part of your biggest successes in life, and I've seen you fail. And I'll always love you. But these people do not know you like I do. And it hit me. I think you can see that. And I said, "Lord, it's okay. It'll take time. Learn to love them. They love you."
Micah and Richie say Jody, the sister they grew up with, has also struggled to adapt to all the new faces in the family. They've reassured her that their newfound brothers and sisters will never take the place of someone they've loved their whole life. And Adrian told the brothers she grew up with much the same thing.
You're the one that saw me take the first steps, you know, first bicycle ride, first date I went out. Who was there? You were there, my brother. But it was tough for him, too, thinking he was going to lose me. Didn't happen. Won't happen.
None of you knew your birth parents.
No.
Nope.
No.
If you could say something to them today, if they were listening, what would you say to them?
I would say thank you for giving us to the families that we went to,
Absolutely.
because we had happy lives.
I think we'd all say that. I think every one of us just now said that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we were all blessed to end up with the parents that raised us.
Yes.
Turned out to be a magnanimous thing that they did.
As for the future, These six hope to make up for lost time, if they can, and grow old together. But the future with the other surviving biological siblings is less clear. Those six, including 3 who stayed with the birth parents, chose to maintain their privacy and not participate in our interviews. Several of them were upset at the story being made public at all, causing a rift in the newly formed family. Gary and the others here hope it's only temporary.
I wish that the other 6 would share this with us.
We all wish that.
I really wish they would.
Because we love that.
We didn't know each other. We've been out here for years. And our arms are open. And maybe someday, 1, 2, maybe all of them will come in out of their own world that they share and they live in. And we'll be together again.
So who is Gary Klar? He's the guy you go to the gym with to sweat and swap stories. He's the soulmate who knows exactly how it feels to uncover a secret kept too long. He's the man who's right behind you when you're the baby of the family. He's the son you always wanted, the best friend you ever had, and an old flame you never forgot.
Gary says he can't imagine not having found this out, and he is very, very grateful that you did what you did.
He thanks me a lot. He always says, Mickey, he goes, you've given me a rebirth.
As tangled and as strange and as coincidental and fate-driven as the story may seem, I and my sisters and my brothers, newfound though we may be, choose to really say this is a wonderful story about how we've all come back together again. I'm here. I have love. My home is your home. You're my blood. Let me get to know you for as little or as long as I have on this earth. Let me know you. I'm your brother.
One of those missing from this family portrait is Sister Sally. She was killed in an accident 11 years ago at age 47. Micah says of all the brothers and sisters, Sally was the one who always yearned to know what happened to the children who were given up for adoption and never came home. Gary believes she'd be happy to know they have finally found each other. And now here's David Bloom with a look at what's coming up this weekend on Today.
The bonds of friendship and family. It's the story of 2 men who met by chance, became pals, then discovered a much deeper connection. Reporter Steve Wiechek of CNN affiliate WFSB has the details.
I couldn't have had a better father. And truthfully, I am Gary Klar, the glass man's son.
For many people, the holidays are a time to spend with friends and family. And if you ask Gary Klar of Wilton, he'll tell you friends and family are sometimes one and the same. That's what he found 3 years ago when he discovered his best friend of 25 years, Stephen Barbin, was also his biological brother.
I said, wait a minute. If you're going to tell me that Steve Barbin is really my brother biologically, who's been my best friend for over half my life, you'd be giving me the greatest gift in the world.
The first words out of my mouth were, I knew it. They're so much alike.
The story began when Klar was adopted as an infant, something his dad Ben and mom Marge never told him. Fast forward 30 years to the mid-1970s, and Gary met Stephen in a Norwalk, Connecticut bar, a mere chance meeting.
It was a very strange bond in the sense that we felt like brothers pretty much from the beginning.
Gary even served as Stephen's best man when he got married in 1988. But it wasn't until a fateful phone call from a DCF caseworker in 1999 that Gary learned about his true background and the biological bond.
Incredulous. I mean, I was stunned.
They say truth is stranger than fiction, and Gary Klar has learned a lot about his family's truth, including the fact he has 12 brothers and sisters. It's a subject he now plans to write about in his true life book.
What I've learned is that all families have issues. Nothing is as it seems.
In case you're wondering, Gary says he has been in contact with most of his siblings. He's become quite close with 6 of them. In Hartford, Steve Wiechek for CNN.
And here they are, Steve Barbin and Gary Klar. They join me now from Hartford, Connecticut. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Happy New Year, Kira.
Happy New Year. I am so blown away by this story. It's absolutely amazing. All right, so you guys meet in a bar in 1975. Kind of set the scene for me, if you will.
Well, we were out with a few different friends from each of a different group of that, but we kind of put the tables together, a few guys that were just having a good time with each other and had a few steaks and that, and we kind of gelled as a group. And then what happened after that, as the months went by, we'd get together and do it a few times again here and there. And then Gary and I started talking to each other more one-on-one and found a mutual connection on things, and we became close, discussing many different topics and that, and that was the foundation for what was to come over the next, 25 years.
Gary, did you kind of feel this sort of weird connection with Steve when you guys met, or?
Yeah, no, it was pretty amazing, Kira. From the first night we met, and then we shared this nice evening, Steve and myself and two other friends, my circle, one from my circle, one from his. Yeah, we became very, very good friends very, very quickly, and it kind of developed from there, and it always was kind of a unique bond.
Did either one of you know that you were adopted? I think I heard in the piece, Steve, you knew you were adopted?
Yes, I knew from pretty much the beginning that I was adopted. I had no other brothers and sisters. I was raised an only child. But yeah, I had full knowledge of that.
So the parents that raised you, did you ever ask questions about your biological parents or possible brothers and sisters? Did they ever tell you anything?
No, unbelievably or not. I mean, they told me I was adopted. I understood what the concept meant, and I really never had any great urge to find out anything more other than that, because we had such a good relationship, my mom and my dad, that just was never that inquisitive either way.
Kira?
Yes.
I never really knew an adopted person before, and when I met Stephen, one of the interesting points to the story is within the first year of our friendship, and he told me he was adopted, and he had a wonderful mom and dad, and his dad is deceased, and his mom, Jean, is really, trust me, very, very beautiful person. I had asked him if he ever, was curious about finding out where he had come from, and just what he said, you know what, I got a great mom and dad, and I'm glad I have them, and I have no interest in really knowing my biology. He's always felt very comfortable.
Now, Gary, what about your parents? Why didn't they tell you you were adopted?
Well, they certainly didn't tell me, and for almost 53 years, doing my research, and some of it's conjecture, but I think perhaps in the times that I was adopted, I was raised Jewish, and our biological parents were not Jewish, and perhaps, again, conjecture, but in those times, both of my sets of my grandparents were Orthodox Jewish. And I think perhaps there may have been a little bit of a problem not coming biologically from a Jewish woman. That might be one of the issues. It's one of my little theories I have.
Wow. Well, Gary, so then you got this call from the State Department. What were you thinking? Okay, this is just impossible. This is too weird. Gary.
Oh, hi, Kira. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Live TV, I love it. Well, no, live television.
I can also tell you, you're still taken by it. I understand. It is pretty bizarre.
Yeah, sometimes I hear myself say things that are really quite astounding, even now. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Give me your question.
So you got the call from the State Department.
Right.
What was your reaction?
Well, the lady basically within a few minutes of getting me, we had played phone tag for about 10 days, and when she got me, literally tomorrow is the 3rd anniversary of the phone call, December 30th. She basically said within 2 minutes, Gary, do you know that you're an adopted child? And basically my jaw dropped, and I said, no, you must have the wrong Gary Klar. And she absolutely, in another couple of minutes, convinced me. She obviously had the proof and the paperwork and the documentation, and the story was true. There was no, running away from it, and, there were further twist to the tale as she unraveled it for me.
Wow. So, Steve, tell me how you and your brother are a lot alike. Obviously, you're best friends, but tell me about some similarities.
He's bigger than me.
Yeah, right. We both have a very good sense of humor, and on top of that, we have a very good self-deprecating sense
self-deprecating.
We have tendencies to worry about things, and maybe we'll discuss and get a little deeper into topics of things that we find we like to discuss. Gary being an actor and me always being a fan, I've always enjoyed accompanying him on certain things, never in front of the camera, but enjoy watching what goes on behind it. And just the way we think, we've always kind of felt that if we could be in a room together, we kind of know what each one may be thinking.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of differences, my brother can be a little louder, a little more opinionated. Me, I'm a little more quiet with everything. And, you know, you just things that you just find over the years that you kind of relate to and know that you kind of complement. It's like a ball. It's come together. Some of the things that he has that I don't, and vice versa. We're like the yin and yang of each other sometimes.
Absolutely.
So. Yeah, and Gary says you have the same barber too.
Yeah. Yes, we do.
Mine gives a closer shave, though.
All right, so you guys, tell me about your brothers and your sisters. How many kids were in your family from your biological parents? How many kids did your mom have, and how many brothers and sisters have you reunited with and been able to sort of become a family with, I guess?
Who would you like to answer the question, Kira?
Go ahead, Gary.
Okay. Well, I was number 7 of 13 children. Stephen comes, you're number 12. Stephen's number 12. And what we found out, as we kind of delved further into the story, that, our parents basically gave up 9 of us. And we went to various, homes, different religions, different last names. And as of today, there's 6 of us who I really believe were real solid. We have, of course, Stephen and myself, our brother Richard, our sister Micah, our sister Adrian. All of us are in pretty much in or around the greater Bridgeport area, and we have a lovely sister Joan who lives in Florida. And us, the 6 of us, are real tight. I guess one of the sad parts of the story is, as I started to really unravel this tale, and I had this curiosity to find out where I came from, something that Stephen, as I said before, kind of never did. I bonded really well. We all bonded together very well, but as I started to really work on this story, 2 brothers who stayed within the biological unit their whole life, and 2 sisters who were also adopted out as we were, really pulled away from the rest of us. And perhaps, in a sense, I was the catalyst that made them pull away. I think they thought I was going to tell some horrid, sordid tale, and I will say to anybody who's seen anything we've done up to this point in time, I defy anybody to tell me that it's gone that way. We've kept it light, positive. There is a darkness to the story, but I would only say that'll be in the book.
Wow. Well, I do know your biological parents passed away, didn't even get to see or know about this reunion. But, Steve, let me ask you, your mom, Jean, what does she think about all this?
My mother is she thinks it's absolutely wonderful. She's a wonderful person.
Yes.
She's been a wonderful mother to me. She is very, my mom is 81 years old. She's always been a progressive thinker, and she just thinks it's fabulous. And, of course, to learn everything was just kind of shocking to her, but to find out that Gary, who she's known over the years, is my brother, was just something that blew her away. Except that she's always loved Gary, but it was just something that she couldn't believe until weeks later when the proof actually rolled in.
So do you ever fight like brothers?
Do we ever what?
Do you ever fight like brothers?
No, never. No.
Verbally.
We verbally do, and we give and take like that and everything.
Oh, we do we?
No, we don't. But yeah.
I see a road act happening here,
Yeah,
not only a movie and a book. Hey, you guys, Gary and Steve, thanks so much for coming on and sharing your story. It's awesome. It's really neat.
Kira, thanks a lot, and I'd just like to say hello to my mother, Marjorie, who lives in Atlanta, and thanks for giving me a good home.
Oh, very nice. I'll have to look Marjorie up in Atlanta then.
Absolutely, Kira. Happy New Year.
Story for Christmas week. Imagine finding out that your best friend is your brother. That's the story we're going to have this half hour. We're going to meet 2 men, both adopted by separate families, who grew up in the same community, became best friends, and found out later they were brothers. Really great story, and you can tell right now they're just sort of chatting away.
I know, here in the crew, everyone was saying how much fun they've been just talking about it. I guess they have a lot to catch up on. Plus, we're going to have the fashion, let's say fashion highlights.
And there was to know about each other, but the one thing they didn't know was that their lives were even more deeply entwined than they ever could have imagined. Gary Klar was raised in Fairfield, Connecticut, a beloved boy with a happy childhood. Steve Barbin grew up in Bridgeport, just 5 miles away, the only child in another close-knit family. Gary played college football, and after a brief stint in pro ball, he became an actor. Steve also went to college, then worked in insurance, They happened to meet in a bar in 1975 and became fast friends. Both married. At Steve's wedding, Gary served as best man. Two men, best friends for 25 years. Then 3 years ago, they learned from a state agency that their bond was more than friendship. They were biological brothers, both given up for adoption at birth. And Gary Klar and Steve Barbin join us now. Good morning.
Good morning, Jude. Happy holiday.
Thank you very much to you, too. Now, Gary, it was 3 years ago this week that you first got the call.
Absolutely. 2 days before the new year of 1999, out of the blue.
So tell me about it.
I was at home with my 3 teenagers at the time. Very rare that you'd have them all around the kitchen table. My wife was out shopping, wouldn't get home for 3 or 4 hours, and about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a lady from the state of Connecticut tracked me down and within minutes said, "Gary, do you know that you're an adopted child?"
And you had no idea that?
Never, ever knew. Almost 53 years old, and it was a revelation that literally shook the foundations of.
And then how'd you find out about Steve?
Interesting story. As she kind of unraveled my tale, I said, you know, I'm okay with it. I'm okay. I'm an adult. I've lived my life as Gary Klar, and my best friend in the whole world many years ago told me he was adopted, so I'm like him. And at that moment, she stopped me and she said, "Who's your best friend?" I told her, and she said, "Can you give me his phone number?"
Not another word. That was it.
Well, then I said to her, "If you're going to tell me that Steve Barbin," I stopped her, "if you're going to tell me that Steve Barbin is my best friend, you give me the greatest gift in the world."
And she did.
She did.
Now, Steve, you guys do look alike. You guys have the same coloring. You're both losing that hair.
We've always kidded on that, yeah.
But did it ever cross your mind you could be brothers?
Well, we've always felt like we were because we were so close with everything, and our wives always said that we were like brothers and acted like brothers and were inseparable. So, yeah, I think there was that cosmic feeling that we could be brothers, but not to this point that we actually were blood.
Now, your mom, your biological mother, had 13 kids, and she gave up 9 for adoption.
Yes, she did.
And now 6 of you are still close. You've all come in contact before.
That's right.
Right. We've made very close contact with 4 more of the kids, and so 6 of us are kind of real solid, and 5 of us are in the greater Bridgeport area with a sister who's in Florida. Our sister Joan lives in Florida.
Now, you say you're kind of solid, and I have to ask you about this, because Robin and I were talking about it earlier. It turns out that one of your sisters was someone you actually dated many years ago?
In 1979, as my dad lay dying from a horrible accident, I met a girl in the hospital who was coincidentally working there, and her aunt was also very ill. And we kind of fell in. We met there. We fell in. A short, quick, brief, intense 6 months.
Intense.
Very intense. And I don't think I saw her for probably, well, until the story broke. And then guess what? You dated your sister.
So what do you say the first time you see each other after you hear that?
Well, the thing I said to the lady from Hartford when she, realized that, I said, "Is she okay?" I said, "Is she all right with that?" And she said, "Yes, she is." And we didn't know. That's the problem with adopting kids and putting them out to different families, different faiths in a small radius from where you were born. We didn't know. So if there was any forgiving to do for dating, we forgave ourselves very quickly. She's a wonderful kid.
And it turns out another one of your brothers was a weightlifting buddy of yours.
Her brother, they were adopted into the same family, and from there, they found out later on that they were from our family.
Wow. How has the whole experience of finding out your brothers actually changed your friendship? Or has it?
Between Gary and I?
Yeah.
No, I think it's made it stronger. The fact that we know we're blood obviously would do that, I think. But I think we've always felt that. I mean, at least on my part, I know, I've always loved Gary as like a brother, a big brother that I never had with it. So he kind of filled that role for me, I think, finding him even at a later age. But it hasn't changed anything, in a worse sense or anything.
So do you wish it would have been found out earlier, or is this the right way for it to happen?
It's the right way for it to happen. We're okay with it. We've always been solid with it. My dad, who was the greatest father a kid could have, gave me very big shoulders to carry this bang 53 years later do you know you're adopted? And I couldn't have wished for a better father and a better mother and to grow up in the family I did. And I hope I depart the earth before he does, because he's the greatest friend I've ever had.
Oh, don't say that.
It's true. It's true, you knucklehead.
Thanks a lot for sharing that story.
Okay, absolutely.
Have a great New Year.
Happy holiday. Thank you.
Bye-bye. When we come back, we're going
Friend is really my brother.
8 orphan children find their superheroes.
3 Klar, their oldest child. So it was mom, dad, and 4 kids living in this wonderful middle-class neighborhood. It's the only home I ever knew. I had a wonderful childhood.
I'm Steve Barbin, and I was born in December 17th, 1952, to adoptive wonderful parents, Jean and Omar Barbin.
In 1975, I walked into a bar restaurant and ordered a beer, and very quickly noticed a guy sitting next to me, and he was drinking a beer. I said, hey, I'm Gary. He said, hey, my name's Steve. And we just started talking, and it became a very close friendship with a guy that ultimately became my best friend.
I wanted Gary to be my best man because we had forged such a friendship beyond a friendship, and it was a special moment.
We were like brothers. And then little did we know that everything, very, very shortly, as we went into the new year of 1999, that everything would change. I got a call from a caseworker. The woman told me that I was an adopted child, and I was stunned. I spent 52 years of my life believing that I was the firstborn child of Benjamin and Marjorie Klar, and then finding out I was really the 7th child in a family of 13 kids that my biological parents gave away 9 of their 13 children. And then I said to this lady, I said, well, you know what? My best friend is adopted, so I'm okay. Then I'm adopted like him. And then the story got deeper and more convoluted. She said to me, who is your best friend? And I said, Steve Barbin. At that point, she said to me, do you have his telephone number? I said, ma'am, if you're going to tell me that Steve Barbin, my best friend in the whole world for over half of my life, is really my full-blood brother, you would be giving me the greatest gift in the world.
I get a phone call. A woman says to me, is there anybody close to you that has ever said, you are so alike, you could be like brothers? And at that point, I said to her, are you telling me that Gary Howard Klar is my blood brother? I called Gary and I says, Gary, do you believe this?
It's wonderful to know that my blood and his blood is the same blood that beats within our system.
That is the extraordinary bond, and it's something that wasn't manufactured or came along after the fact. It's something that was there from the beginning.
I just love him. I love him. I love him. He's the kindest, most decent person I've ever known in my life. I hope I get off the planet before he does. Sorry.
It's so mind-boggling to me how you can take 2 people that meet each other, start up a conversation, then to have on top of that them become so close, but almost like identical twins in some way, the way we think, and then to find out years later that you actually are blood brothers. That's extraordinary.
That is extraordinary. I think you're right.